This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Big Cat, The Life of Baseball Hall of Famer Johnny Mize. The author is Jerry Grillo. Mize was one of the greatest hitters in baseball's golden age of great hitters. Born and raised in tiny Demorest, Georgia, in the northeast Georgia mountains, Mize emerged from the heart of Dixie as a Bunyonesque slugger, a quiet but sharp-witted man from a broken home who became a professional player at the age of 17, embarking on an extended tour of the expansive, and it was expansive, St. Louis Cardinals minor league system. Mize then spent 15 seasons terrorizing major league pitchers as a member of those Cardinals, the New York Giants of Melot, Leo Durocher, and finally with the New York Yankees, who won a record 5 straight World Series with Mize as their ace in the hole, the best pinch hitter in the American League. Few hitters have combined such meticulous back control with brute power the way Mize did. Mize was a line drive hitter who rarely struck out and also hit for distance, too, to all fields, and usually for a high average. Nicknamed the Big Cat. Quote, nobody had a better, smoother, easier swing than John, said Cardinals teammate Don Gutteridge. It was picture perfect. Jerry Grillo is a longtime journalist and author of The Music and Mythocracy of Colonel Bruce Hampton, a basically true biography. His work has appeared in Georgia Trend, Atlanta Magazine, Paste Magazine, Newsday, and jambands.com, among other publications. Happy to have Jerry Grillo on this podcast for the first time. Jerry, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Heck of an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. So why Mize for you as a subject?
Well, a number of reasons. First off, I don't think there was been a time in my life that I didn't know who the heck Johnny Mize was. And the reason is because I grew up in a household with a father who was a New York Yankees fan. And so he remembered the Yankees of those late 40s and early 50s with DiMaggio at the end of his career, Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle at the beginning of theirs, and then this old slugger that they picked up from the New York Giants named John Mize. And Dad always sort of had a little bit of an affinity toward guys like Mize, who were sort of these unsung heroes. Dad loved an underdog. He knew his background. He knew that he had played on some good teams, but never quite got to the big dance. And now with the Yankees, he was ending. And so I'd heard these stories from my father and uncles. They would tell these stories, and Mize kept coming up. Fast forward many years later, I'm the editor at the local newspaper in the county where Mize grew up. Totally unplanned. I don't think I even was aware of it when I moved there, that that's where Johnny was from. Um, but long story short, his daughter introduced herself to me one day to pitch a feature story about her dad, sort of a commemorative thing, and a friendship developed. And after about a year, it just got in my head, I'd love to write a book about your dad, because I did a little research and I thought, nobody's written about this guy. And even then I thought he's sort of the Forrest Gump of baseball, this quiet figure, misunderstood, but turns up in a lot of interesting and places with these weird adventures. And then about 20 or so years later, I actually wrote the book.
Jerry, he was a can't miss Hall of Famer, great statistics, then all but forgotten. He spent 28 years waiting for the call from Cooperstown before he was finally inducted in 1981. Why was this man all but forgotten?
That is one of the questions I, of course, try to answer in the book, and I've got um, a few theories, if you will. But I think there are several reasons why it took so long. One, he played for 3 different teams, which wasn't too common back then, right? Usually players, because of the reserve clause, generally stayed on the same team whether they wanted to or not, or in the same league. You didn't have too many guys going from the National League to the American League and vice versa. It happened, but not as often as we see today. And I think that's one reason. So he stuck, 5 or 6 years with the Cardinals, 5 years with the Giants, and then 5 years as an old man by baseball terms with the Yankees. So I think it was hard for sports writers to pin down, at least the voters, who was he most dominant with? I think timing was a big part of it. The Hall of Fame rules changed shortly after Mize retired, a number of writers were saying Mize is going to be on my ballot next year. This was the year he was retiring, but then that next year they changed it to a 5-year waiting period. And then when the 5 years was up, they had changed the voting rule to every other year for inductions. For about 12 or 15 years, the Hall of Fame had this every other year induction schedule. So Mize kind of, and through it all, fell under the radar, I think, as some of his contemporaries, better known players, got into the Hall of Fame and barely got in. For some reason, Mize's eligibility with the writers came at a time when the writers were particularly resistant to vote players in the Hall of Fame for one reason or another. If you go back and look, you'll see very few inductions as compared to today. And so I think Mize was sort of the victim of a number of different circumstances, and he wasn't the best self-promoter either, right? He was not unfriendly with the press, but he didn't seek their approval, and he wasn't a limelight kind of guy.
And the day he gets inducted, Bob Gibson's going in that same day, August day, up in Cooperstown. It's during the baseball strike too, right? I mean, the crowd is booing Bowie Kuhn, booing Vin Scully. I think it was there, right? It was Vin? Oh no, Jack Buck. Jack Buck.
Jack Buck gets it.
Is there as like the MC. They're booing him, and then Mize gets up there, and Mize thanks the fans right away.
Yeah,
of course.
I think he you mentioned this in the introduction too, and I think that whoever the publishing marketing person who probably put some of that stuff was right on. He was sharp-witted. He was this quiet, sharp-witted guy. He knew his timing was on because as you mentioned, the strike was going on, or I think it had just ended, and they had planned to start the following week with the All-Star game, with a belated All-Star game. And my God, who boos Jack Buck, for crying out loud? But I mean, that's how mad the fans were, and Johnny could feel it. And he gets up there and he pacifies them. He says, "First thing I want to do is I want to thank the fans. Without y'all, we wouldn't even be here today." You know, in his big southern sort of grumbly voice, and I thought that was just beautiful. And by the way, Mize's Hall of Fame speech is on YouTube for anybody who's interested. The whole thing is there, and it's only about 8 minutes, but it's beautiful. He delivers one of the best Hall of Fame speeches, and it reflects the 28 years of waiting. He even jokes about that. But yeah, I thought he sort of made it. He took over the stage, if you will, and Bob Gibson, I think, was an excellent co-inductee for him because they both were Cardinals, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of an interesting and perfect pairing for the Big Cat.
The Big Cat name. How did he get that name?
There's several stories. The story that Johnny liked to tell, and it's in his book, How to Hit, is, and he told this to interviewers as well, is it would have been 1940, 41, one of his last years with the Cardinals. I actually went back and pinpointed when it had to have happened because Johnny was never clear on this. And it came, according to Johnny, from a journeyman infielder named Joe Orengo, who played like every position in the infield at one time or another. And Johnny insists he was playing second base for the Cardinals at the time, and the infielders were having a tough time throwing the ball to first on this particular day. And Johnny was picking them up out of the dirt and out of midair. And after a while, Orengo turns to him and says, "John, you look like a big cat out there with the way you're picking these balls out of the." He was complimenting him for the graceful way he was playing first base. And that's John's story. And he said the nickname kind of stuck. But I asked around and did a little research, and there were several players on the New York Giants who claimed that they were responsible for giving him the nickname some years later. This would have been in 47, 48. And it was more of a derisive nickname or a joking nickname that was sort of mocking the way he plodded around first base, stalking around the base slowly like a big cat, So it could have come from either one of those. And it was a couple of Giants who sort of took credit. Bill Rigney, who was quite a character, and Buddy Blattner, equally a character, a great broadcaster following his playing days. My best And favorite, I should say, my favorite explanation is Stan Musial. And he said, did you ever see the way Johnny got out of the way of an inside pitch? They'd throw inside and he would just lean back easily on his legs. His head would come back and then he would come back in, graceful as a big cat. And I thought that's pretty good. I thought that explained pretty well Mize's demeanor at the plate.
Jerry, what was your research process like for this book?
Oh, well, it was interesting, Steve. It was a two-part process, if you will. I don't recommend it, but circumstances being what they were, I started the research 20 something years ago after first getting Judy's sort of approval. Yeah, she was excited, and I started by interviewing Judy, Johnny's stepdaughter, and then interviewing her brother Jim, Johnny's only son, his stepson, and then I found some players who Johnny had played with. Whitey Ford, topping the list, I guess, in terms of fame. So it was fun talking with Whitey Ford, Bobby Brown, former Yankees third baseman and president of the American League. Don Gutteridge, who was an all-star infielder who played with Johnny on the Cardinals. Oh gosh, a number of players who have since passed away. But at the time, I was like, these are all guys who knew Johnny, played with him. I could get their numbers. And then a couple of writers like Bob Bragg, who has since passed away, but a terrific sports writer, Hall of Fame sports writer. And so that's how I started with interviews. And then I put the project down for family reasons. Just couldn't stick on with the book project. And I even told a publisher that wanted to publish the book, got to put it down for a while. That lasted 20 years. And then when I picked it up again, Steve, we had this wonderful invention called the internet with such amazing databases. I was able to find newspapers from the Dominican Republic, from Venezuela when I wanted to tell that part of the story. And of course, from every place in the US. There are several databases that you can subscribe to find virtually every newspaper that would have covered Mize in those days, including the sporting news. And then, of course, a few more interviews. And so it was just a lot of digging, without an outline, frankly. I wanted to gather as much information as I could and then develop an outline from that. And along the way, I found some real treasures, and it helped determine it. Let's put it this way. I think waiting to write the book made it a much better book than if I had written it 20 something years ago when I first actually had an offer from a publisher and thought I was going to write it. But it's a much better book for having waited.
With all those interviews you did, were there any common themes about this man?
There were a few, actually. There were a few. One of them was this idea that he cared mostly about hitting and could give a damn about fielding.
Mhm.
That was one that emerged from a couple of players and writers. Another one was that he was that sharp-witted thing that keeps coming up, this sly sense of humor thing that comes up when you talk to some of the writers who interviewed him back in the day, and even in the 70s when Johnny was well into his 50s and 60s. So things about him like that kept coming up. He was a sharp-witted guy. He was quiet, but when you got him talking about hitting, he was a professor. Those things kept coming up, and they kind of emerge as themes to a certain degree in the book, and so they help give some direction to the book, I think, in the way they talked about their old teammate or in some cases their old opponent.
What do you think his lasting legacy on the game is?
I think one of the things that we might say is the designated hitter rule. There's one that
Hmm.
I would indirectly, players like Johnny Mize inspired, what we now have that's now in both leagues, the designated hitter rule. I think he was the prototype, especially those last 5 years with the Yankees. Casey Stengel, being no fool, realized that this man was going to help him win ball games with his bat at just the right time, knowing what an inexact science hitting can be, and knowing what his chances were with Mize, right? He played the odds, and he also knew that Mize was not going to win too many games with him games in the field for him. But he was smart enough to know how to make the right play. I mean, it's interesting. If you one of the things I tried to include in the book was to make it interesting, was in addition to showing some of his miscues in the field, was to show times when he actually made some spectacular plays, and to show some statistics that back up the contention that the first half of his career he was quite a good first baseman. So I think that one of the things, he's this great all-around player, a great all-around hitter as a young man. I mean, he actually even had speed. He led the league in triples, finished in the top 3 a few times. And he was actually called out for his speed as a young man by the press. But then as he gets hurt, and I think his story is an example of, the athlete's journey, really, if you will. In some ways, he exemplifies the athlete's journey of his era. The one that was interrupted by war, and the one that succeeded in spite of it. And I think that in some ways Johnny Mize is the everyman superstar, if you will. I mean, he certainly was a superstar. He had the hitting statistics that put him in that rarefied air, but he was also this sort of everyman because we've kind of let him become that. And I think in history and in his legacy, that's not a bad place to be.
The book is Big Cat, The Life of Baseball Hall of Famer Johnny Mize. It is out now wherever you get books. The author is Jerry Grillo. Thank you for joining me, Jerry.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
This is Speaking of Writers.